Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, there are calls for more measurable moves from the world's diplomatic community over the deepening horrors of the war in Sudan, a conflict that has cost, conservatively, tens of thousands of lives, but has seen too few international promises of action delivered on. Also, Egypt's become the world's leading date producer, but exporters want to see those figures rising. The country's planning on ramping up investment in a particularly popular type of produce. And on your bike, Cape Town's bicycle mayor leads a burgeoning cycling culture in the South African city, sharing his skills with experts and novices alike. But first, the civil war in Sudan is amongst the world's worst. At least 20,000 people have been killed and an unprecedented man-made famine triggered by an ego clash between rival generals. One who leads the army, the other the RSF paramilitary. And yet the war attracts fatally little diplomatic action. As international leaders meet in New York for the UN General Assembly, the body's Secretary General has raised alarm about the escalation in the Sudanese conflict. Also, on Wednesday, the US pledged $24 million in humanitarian aid. And a ministerial meeting did try to ramp up more support. Humanitarian chiefs, though, want to see more being tangibly done at the diplomatic level.
We urge member states to use all their leverage to bring the horrific violations of international humanitarian law and the abuses of human rights law to an end. Second, we need a concerted diplomatic push for a step change in humanitarian access, for the safe, streamlined, and swift delivery of aid through all possible routes.
Now, Khalid Khair is a Sudanese activist who was at that ministerial meeting on Wednesday. She joins me now from New York. Khalid, first of all, you were also at UNGA a year ago trying to keep attention on what's happening in Sudan. Have you seen enough progress at the diplomatic level over the last year?
The short answer is no, and that's because the needs have grown exponentially since last year. Since last year, we've had a famine declaration. We have had evidence of genocidal attacks and atrocities. We have had a deepening humanitarian situation. We have had, the world's largest displacement crisis, the world's largest child displacement crisis in Sudan, and we also have the world's largest protection crisis in Sudan, with conflict-related sexual violence going through the roof. And because of that, what we're seeing just in the past 2 days of being here in New York is nowhere near enough from any of the member states, as well as the UN Secretariat, that goes anyway into, fully addressing what's the needs in Sudan.
So in those conversations that you were party to on Wednesday, what kind of things are you hearing? I mean, for example, one aspect is how over the last year or so it's become increasingly apparent the war that started last August has components that in some ways make it a proxy war. Did that come up at any of the talks that you witnessed either on Wednesday or earlier in the week?
No, it hasn't, at least not in the open sessions that we have been privy to. As I understand, there is a closed session today, which might have a much more frank conversation. But for example, today's session, which you just recently showed, had a group of countries assembled that are frankly very much part and parcel of the continuation of this war. You had the United Arab Emirates, you had Egypt, you had Saudi Arabia, you had Qatar. All of these countries we know, and we have very good evidence of, that they are fueling the conflict by supporting one party or the other. And so in many ways, this humanitarian funding session today that had all of these countries in it is sort of like humanitarian gaslighting. All of these countries are able to come and sit and say that they feel for the people of Sudan, that they're aware of the sort of state collapse of the humanitarian situation, the worsening humanitarian situation in Sudan. And this kind of forum allows them to be able to both fund the war in Sudan and arm the war in Sudan, and then, express their sympathy and put, frankly, a pittance for most of them on the table for humanitarian response in Sudan. There has to be a way to do this better, and there has to be a way for other countries that are truly concerned for the Sudanese people to hold the countries that fuel this conflict to account. Now, what we know is the United States, which gave around $424 million pledged today, is also the country that 2 days ago embraced Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler of the United Arab Emirates, who the UN's own reporting has found is very much in, part of the problem, effectively, that they are funding the RSF, that they are arming the RSF. And those two things cannot exist in the same universe. What we need to see is much more pressure on countries like the UAE, but also like Egypt, like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia and Iran, who are sending arms to Sudan from other member states, and we just haven't seen any traction on that.
And when it comes to elements of the conflict itself on the ground, there have been growing concerns about the imminent fall of the Darfuri city of El Fasher, which has been under siege from the RSF for months now. Get us up to speed with what you understand to be happening there at the moment, and whether there's been much diplomatic engagement on that front.
Well, sources on the ground, as well as satellite imagery, confirm that the RSF is making some gains in parts of El Fasher. But we are also seeing some of the joint forces, these are armed groups that signed a peace agreement several years ago, are pushing back as much as they can. Now, the general trend, and this has been the general trend since April, is that the RSF are still likely to take El Fasher. The issue there is that once they take El Fasher, the atrocity risk goes through the roof. And this is something that we know will happen. This is the sort of pre-Rwanda moment where everybody knew exactly what was going to happen in Rwanda and did absolutely nothing to stop it. And we are seeing that moment in El Fasher right now. And the world, it's not like the world doesn't have information at hand. They very much do. We haven't seen, with the world assembled here in New York over this week, anywhere near the level of concerted diplomatic pressure on the RSF, on their backers, to really push back away from that eventuality or that scenario.
Well, staying with human rights, the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan has accused the country's transitional leaders of dragging their feet over the implementation of the 2018 peace deal that led to the official end of a brutal 6-year civil war. Now, last week, the government extended the transitional period by 2 years, meaning that elections that had been due this December were pushed back until 2026. Now, President Salva Kiir says that they still have preparations to make for the transition back to democratic rule. But top observers say that food is scarce. More than 4 million South Sudanese are still displaced because of failings at the top. And the delay announced last week is unlikely to lessen the humanitarian crises. Now, with me now for more on this is Yasmin Souka, the chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan. Yasmin, thanks so much for making time to speak to me. First of all, so how has the government's conduct over the years since that 2018 peace deal was signed informed your fears about the transparency of this latest 2-year delay?
Well, if you consider that, in fact, the revitalized peace agreement, which was signed in 2019, provided for a number of arrangements which constituted a roadmap to peace. Now, that revitalized peace agreement was already extended by a further 2-year period, and now it's been extended for another 2-year period. And at the end of the day, none of the commitments in terms of the agreement have actually been implemented. So there's no constitution. There hasn't been a unification of the armed forces. And when you look at the transitional justice mechanisms, which were really meant to address the ethnic divisions in the country, none of those have actually been, established. And of course, when you look at the economy of the country, that has been wholly mismanaged. And so you have more than 9 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. And quite frankly, this is just a recipe for further impunity in the country. And with the lack of accountability, the violations in the country actually increase because there is no accountability for any human rights violations which amount to serious crimes.
Now, you've mentioned there just the state of the economy and also the scale of some of the humanitarian crises that South Sudan is still faced with. One of the provisions of that 2-year pushback announced last week by the government was a heads up that austerity measures are on the way. Did that surprise you, considering A, South Sudan's vast mineral wealth, but B, the struggle it's already facing to be able to tackle the needs of the most vulnerable hit by the fallout from the war?
It is surprising to actually see it in the agreement, and quite frankly, one can only consider it to be a bit of a joke, because already public servants in the country haven't been paid for a year. And, schools and health clinics and courts don't even receive their budget allocations. And when you actually look at the wording in the endorsement of the extension, it talks about tapping into all sources of income. And it also acknowledges that, in fact, it's going to be dependent on external sources to actually raise the kind of budget that is needed to carry it to 2027. At the same time, of course, South Sudan did receive a loan from the UAE amounting to about $13 billion. But what that is in exchange for is, in fact, oil. And that is going to place the country back right until, I think, 2043 is the date. And so, in a way, for generations to come, South Sudan, the oil reserves won't actually benefit them. So this is not a poor country. And yet the majority of the people depend on humanitarians to actually deal with all the immediate socio-economic right needs and livelihood options, which is quite sad.
In DR Congo, opposition figures have accused President Felix Tshisekedi of cracking down on dissenting voices, and hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Kinshasa on Wednesday, demanding the release of political prisoners. Amongst those currently being held are Jean-Marc Kabund, leader of the Alliance for Change Party, also Mike Mukibaye, a former member of the provincial parliament for Together for the Republic, and Seth Kikuni, a candidate in last year's presidential elections. Now, Kabund and Mukibaye were arrested last year for insulting the head of state, and Kikuni arrested this month, accused of spreading false rumours. Now, the country's human rights record has undermined its intention to apply for a seat at the UN Human Rights Council, and critics of Tshisekedi say that there is little sign of a genuine national commitment to the defence of human rights.
We are members of the opposition who take action in the interest of the people. Our leaders are unjustly incarcerated, so we demand that the law be applied properly.
We're heading towards a modern dictatorship under Felix Tshisekedi. He violates the rights and freedoms of the people by unjustly imprisoning anyone who criticizes his regime.
To Egypt now, where its date producing has made it the world's leader for the produce. However, export figures are still lower than could be. Our team sent us this report.
This oasis boasts over 80,000 palm trees, and date harvesting began 2 weeks ago. The manager of the largest farm in Egypt is pleased with the results.
Actually, we are number one. We are pioneering the date production in Egypt. We have our standards, our know-how that gives us this premium quality. Every single aspect is measured, is followed by restricted operations and procedures.
With 1.8 million tons of dates this year, Egypt asserts its position as the top producer worldwide, but it still exports only 3% of its total production.
However, the types of dates that Egypt is producing, it's not only majouls. We have lots of dates. We have majouls, Siwi, Saidi, Gizawi. Internationally, people are not asking for. It's not like majoul. Majoul is the king of dates.
At the Ministry of Agriculture, there are genuine ambitions for the future of both production and exports.
Egypt is the 10th largest exporter of dates worldwide. We expect to add 500,000 tons more by planting 5 million palm trees. These varieties have a high economic return and therefore will help trade. So, God willing, we will be able to increase the export value of Egyptian dates.
With these new investments, the Egyptian government hopes to take the world by storm with its dates.
And now we head to South Africa, where Cape Town's leader is known as the bicycle mayor. Sindile Mavundla has been a leading figure in promoting cycling culture in the city. Clarice tells us more.
A rare sight on the streets of Cape Town.
Yeah, this car behind you.
A group of girls cycling through Khayelitsha Township. Ahead of the peloton,
Hi, my name is Sindile Mavundla, and I'm the bicycle mayor of Cape Town.
he got this title for promoting the culture of cycling in the South African city. He teaches first-time riders how to ride a bike, including young girls in impoverished communities.
The goal is to set up the majority of girls in the township. They are not given much sport options, and we have always seen that bicycle has the potential of changing lives. Hence, we started Culture Cycling Academy.
It's very rare to see girls cycling, so I saw an opportunity of a lifetime. Girls cycling here in Khayelitsha is one of the best things. We're encouraging more girls to do cycling.
But learning to ride a bike is not always as easy as it seems. And that is not the only challenge.
You got it. People started to look at a bicycle as a very affordable mode of transportation, despite the safety, despite the lack of safe infrastructure that is connected. But you started to see that there's a need where people really want to get off their vehicles and actually jump on a bicycle and cycle to work, or cycle to the shop, cycle to school.
The project has grown for over 5 years, and now over 1,000 cyclists can be seen on the main road. They, like her, are now ready for any bumpy ride.
Congratulations. That's so great. That is all we have time for Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. We'll be back with more in about 45 minutes. Take care.